Hey everybody. This lesson is called What is Alive? And it is a pre-information leading up to the lab that we're going to be talking about next class. Um, Please take notes either in your written notebook or on your class notebook. I will distribute my notes to you guys, but it is really important that you at least watch this video. If not, the best policy would be for you to also write it, to dedicate it to your memory, because this is a process. And information that we'll be using throughout the year. So please, please, please make sure that you are taking notes in some capacity throughout this video. Okay, so I'm going to go over to class notes, and as you'll notice, I have some writing here. I kind of pre-wrote out a bunch of stuff on the right side here because it would just take too long. It would be too long of a video if I tried to type everything out as I go. So you are going to need to write this out. You can pause the video if you'd like, to kind of keep up, or you can watch it, try and understand what I'm saying, and then write it out. That's always a good policy as well. Okay, so let's get started here. In past classes, we have talked about the characteristics of life and how those are kind of a checklist for verifying whether an object in front of me is alive or not. Okay. And so today we're going to focus on one of those characteristics of life. Okay. So our big question is, what is alive? But our next big question is, how do we determine if something is alive? Okay, so this kind of header is starting out with one way to determine whether or not something is living is to understand what they can do. Okay, so if I can figure out what an organism's able to do, I can verify whether or not they are living. I know that living things must grow and they need energy to do that. So we need to figure out two things. Number one, we need to figure out how living things break down food into energy, right? I know that living things need energy, but how do they get it? And then how do they break it down? And the second thing we need to figure out today is what is going to prove that they are breaking down the food. Remember that breaking down food is called metabolism. Okay, so our first question of the day is, how are living things going through this process of metabolism to break down their food into energy? Our second question is, what is going to prove that they are doing that process? Okay, so that's what we're going to be focusing on in this video. Now, number one, okay, how do we prove that they're going through this process of metabolism? Okay, again, metabolism is the breakdown of food into usable energy. That is a vocab term. You need to know that. We call metabolism cellular respiration. Cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is also a vocab term. Okay, you need to know that word as well. They all pretty much mean the same thing. There are different types of metabolism that we will learn later on in the year, but right now, the only type of breaking down food that you need to know about is cellular respiration. Now, generally, when we hear the word respiration, we think of the respiratory system, which means that that organism is breathing. Okay, when we talk about cellular respiration, we are not talking about breathing. We are talking about breaking down food into usable energy. And I'm going to use my drawing tool here real quick. Into usable energy. Very important that we kind of highlight that word usable. When we eat our food is not necessarily usable yet. We have to break it down into energy that we can use. And that is what we're going over right now. Okay? So, how does this whole process of cellular respiration work? Again, I want to remind us that cellular respiration is metabolism, is a form of metabolism. Breaking down food into usable energy. So, how do we break down food into usable energy? Well, we do it through a couple different processes. The first process is when a living thing eats. When a living thing is eating, so let's get our little guy over here, our happy little man, boop, boop, boop. Okay, he's eating food. And I'm going to draw a little arrow. That food is going into his body through his mouth. Okay, so our little guy's eating food. And when we eat food, we get these really cool macromolecules called carbohydrates. You've probably heard about a carbohydrate when you've seen, or when people talk about bread or crackers. Carbohydrates are in all of your food. Okay, it just depends how much carbohydrates are in your food. Um, yeah. Another word for carbohydrate or a type of carbohydrate is sugar. Okay, so carbohydrates are the same thing as sugar. They are the same thing. Carbohydrates equal sugar. Hopefully that looks like an equal sign. Okay, but if we're going to get real scientific about it, we don't really care about the carbs or the sugar to begin with. What we're really concerned with is, well, we are concerned about the sugar because another term for sugar is glucose. And this is the term that we generally use to talk about sugar. So again, all three of these words mean the same thing. Carbohydrates are sugar. The formal term for sugar that we're talking about, because there's different types of sugar, is glucose. Glucose cannot be used by the cell when it enters your body. Okay, so let's leave that little note. Glucose cannot be used by your cells when it enters your body. Okay, so we eat food, specifically carbohydrates. Carbohydrates have sugar or are sugar. Another name for sugar is glucose. We will continue to use the word glucose throughout the year, so you need to know that term. Okay, glucose, when it enters into our body, is not necessarily the cell isn't able to use it yet. Okay, it's too big. It's actually a really, really large molecule. Okay, and so it has to be broken down. What's going to break it down? Well, when a living thing breathes, so let's get our guy again. And when our little guy breathes, he is inhaling oxygen. Okay, and oops, I made all these little guys so that we can see what's happening here. But okay, so we inhale oxygen through our nose when we breathe, and through our mouth, actually. So we inhale oxygen. Inhale. Okay, that's breathing in. Okay, so we breathe in oxygen. Why is oxygen important? Well, oxygen, that is also known as O2, that's a vocab term. You need to know that. Okay, oxygen breaks down glucose. So the two players Oxygen and glucose are super important here because one, we eat food. We can't use it yet, or we can't use the energy from that food as glucose because glucose is too big. So we need oxygen to break glucose apart into smaller pieces. And again, the key word here is we can't use glucose yet. It's not in a form that we can use when it enters our body. One more time, we have to break it down. The way that we break it down is by having oxygen in our system. Oxygen enters our body when we inhale or breathe in. So earlier, I said that cellular respiration is not breathing. That's still correct. Okay. Cellular respiration is where the cell is metabolizing or breaking down the food into usable energy. Before I can do that, I have to take in food and I have to take in oxygen. That so happens to be when I breathe. So if I don't breathe, then I cannot break down food. In order to break down, and the process of breaking down food is called cellular respiration. Okay, so without breathing, I cannot do cellular respiration. But cellular respiration is not actually breathing. Okay, so I also wanted to put in here a little picture of oxygen. Obviously, oxygen doesn't look like this when we're, breathing it in. But this is just like a little illustration so that you can remember because we will see oxygen throughout the year. Okay, so who are my players right now? Again, we have oxygen and glucose. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so it's nice and open for you guys to see. Ignore that for now. Okay, so we have our players, glucose and oxygen. They are both super important for cellular respiration. Now, what is the actual process of cellular respiration? Well, when glucose and oxygen come into contact with one another, sorry, just a bunch of stuff here. When glucose and oxygen come into contact with one another, there's a chemical reaction. And that chemical reaction produces, I'm going to type this out, produces energy. Okay, now this is energy that's actually usable to the cell. This energy that is produced by oxygen breaking apart glucose is energy that the cell can use. We also have another product, which is carbon dioxide and water. Now, I talked about like players at the start, okay? I want you to think of this as almost like a video game or some sort of game. And the people involved or the molecules involved are going to get us to our final destination or get us to where we need to be. Okay, so we have some nicknames for some of these different molecules. Okay, the first one, this energy that we can use is called ATP. We will use this term. This is a vocab term. That's why it's highlighted. We will use ATP for every cellular process. Your body can't do anything unless it has ATP. Okay. So here we go. This is ATP. There we are. Okay. ATP is energy the cell can use. Now, we also have another name for carbon dioxide, and that's CO2. Okay, I'm sure you've heard of carbon dioxide before. It is also in our air. We breathe it out. Okay, carbon dioxide is not good for us. It should not be in our bodies. It's definitely not good for our bodies. Yeah. Okay, and then we also have water. Water is H2O. You need to know that chemical formula for it. Again, this is something that we will use throughout the year. So you need to know this. Oops, goodness gracious me, it's not working. Okay, so one more time, this is cellular respiration. This whole process that I just explained is cellular respiration. I'm gonna make it nice and large so you can see it really well. Cellular respiration. Oh my goodness. I didn't think it was gonna be this difficult. Okay. Let's try this one more time. Cellular respiration will be here. The little, oops. Oh my goodness. 1 second, everybody. Boop, 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 boop. Here we are. Okay. And I'm just going to erase that and end up drawing the line in again. There we go. I'm going to say that this is right here. This needs to go there. There we go. Okay. Back on track. Technical difficulties. Sorry about that. Okay. So this whole process is called cellular respiration. And it's the process of taking glucose and oxygen to produce usable energy called ATP. It also produces carbon dioxide and water. The only problem with that is that carbon dioxide and water are actually waste, and they're not very good for our body together. Carbon dioxide and water are waste. Okay, and what happens when carbon dioxide and water are together, they form acid. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, you guys, that this is really not working for me in my favor. Okay, so carbon dioxide and water together form acid. Now, acid is not good for us, right? We don't want acid in our body. So our body needs to get rid of it. How does our body get rid of it? Well, we exhale or release carbon dioxide and water when we breathe out. So originally I said that we breathe in oxygen. Once oxygen has done its job breaking up glucose, then we have energy and we get carbon dioxide and water. That carbon dioxide needs to leave our body. So we exhale this. So let's get our little guy that's not very happy when, oh no, what's happening here? Okay. Let's get our little guy that's not very happy with what's happening here. And he is going to exhale CO2 and H2O into his environment. Okay, again, when I breathe out, I am exhaling. I am releasing toxins from my body. One of those toxins is carbonic acid. Boop. Now, individually, water is not bad for you. You clearly need water in order to be able to carry out life's processes. But it's just when it's in the presence of carbon dioxide that it is not a good thing. We don't want this in our body, so we have to get rid of it. Okay? Now, why did I just talk about all of this? Why does it even matter? Well, we said that we had two goals, right? Number one, how do living things break down food? We should now understand that we take in food, we take in oxygen, oxygen breaks apart glucose into usable energy, which is ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. We get rid of carbon dioxide and water, and we keep the energy to do life's processes. That is cellular respiration. The other goal was to figure out, how do I prove that a living thing is actually metabolizing or going through this process of cellular respiration? How do I prove that? And so, really, so here's number two. And so, really, there's actually some cool ways that we can do this, right? Because clearly, I cannot see energy being made, right? I can't see that. It's happening on a cellular level. I would never be able to tell. So I can't see energy being made, and I cannot see the acid leaving my body when I breathe out or exhale. Okay. So how am I going to figure this out? Well, there's this chemical called phenol red. It's a chemical we have here in the lab, and it changes color when it's in the presence of carbonic acid. Again, if you aren't familiar with carbonic acid is just water and carbon dioxide from earlier. Okay? So if I have this stuff in front of it in the presence of phenol red, the phenol red will change color. Interesting. So that leads me to believe that and here's a picture of phenol red. Here we are. Okay, phenol red in the first tube. Phenol red is here. Okay, and notice that it changes colors to a light yellow. Okay, now, if I know that a living thing will produce this carbonic acid when it goes through cellular respiration, then I can infer that if I have carbonic acid released from a living thing in the presence of phenol red, that the phenol red will change colors from red to yellow, and then I'll know whether or not it's living. Okay, so that's what our whole experiment in class is going to be about. So over here, I have a hypothesis. What's happening here? There we are. My hypothesis is, if phenol red changes color, then carbonic acid is present. If there's carbonic acid present, then I know that whatever's producing that carbonic acid is alive. Okay, so let's write that as a side note. So and this is not an official hypothesis, this is just us writing a note to ourselves that might help us later. So if the phenol red did change colors, and which means, oh my goodness, which means that carbonic acid is present, then whatever produced that carbonic acid is alive. Okay. So again, going back way up to the top, our question is, what's alive? How do I determine that? Well, if I can understand what an organism does, then I can understand whether or not it's alive. One of the activities that would indicate that something's alive is metabolism, or breaking down food. We figured out that metabolism only can occur through this process called cellular respiration. Okay, where we take oxygen and glucose. Oxygen breaks down the glucose into usable energy called ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. That waste is called carbonic acid. Okay. Now, carbonic acid by itself is not necessarily going to prove that something, or we can't see carbonic acid. So how are we going to prove that this is an example of a cell actually going through cellular respiration? Well, we have this phenol red chemical that we know changes colors when it's in the presence of carbonic acid. So if something breathes out carbonic acid, it will change the color of the phenol red to yellow or an orangish color, a lighter shade of red. Okay. And so then if I put something in front of or on the phenol red and ask it to breathe onto it, then I can determine whether or not that thing is alive. So that is the whole point of us going through all of this. What proves that they are metabolizing? Now we can go in and say, all right, how do living things break down food into energy? We're going to say they metabolize or go through cellular respiration. What proves that they are metabolizing? Carbonic acid is released and turns the phenol red, which is a chemical, into another color. Boom. Okay, so please, go back through these notes. Make sure that you understand the players of cellular respiration. You need to know the process of cellular respiration. You need to know that carbonic acid is a product of cellular respiration that we don't need. But this proves that something is alive if it's in the presence of phenol red, because the phenol red will change colors. Carbonic acid is an indicator that cellular respiration has happened. If cellular respiration has happened, then that organism has metabolized, and therefore it can be categorized as alive. Okay. So yeah, that was a lot. Please take notes on this. Make sure that you are asking questions, and I will go over this in class tomorrow as well. Okay, have a good one, guys.